There is no way to protect our financial system and our economy other than Congress doing its job and raising the debt ceiling. If they fail to do it, we will have an economic and financial catastrophe.
Failure to raise the debt ceiling would cause a steep economic downturn, US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned over the weekend. Now, what's this debt ceiling that Yellen and the markets are worrying about? The debt ceiling is the limit mandated by the US Congress above which the US government cannot borrow. The current debt limit is $31.4 trillion, and as of January 2023, the total debt of the United States had already reached $31.4 trillion. The Treasury has been managing with tax inflows and rollovers, but Janet Yellen now says it will be impossible for the government to meet financial commitments from June 1st if the debt ceiling is not raised and the government allowed to borrow more. Alternatively, the debt ceiling at least needs to be suspended, set aside for some time. The heart of the problem is that President Biden faces a House of Representatives where the Republicans have a slender majority, though the Senate has a Democrat majority. And the House Republicans have announced they will suspend the debt ceiling only if it is accompanied by a promise of spending cuts, which President Biden has flatly refused to agree to. The administration's point of view being the government is spending money only on programs legislatively allowed by Congress, and any cuts to these will cripple the economy. Now, the stridently opposing positions adopted by the two parties raises a very real fear of the US government defaulting on its debt and other commitments. Now, any entity which defaults on its debt is faced with higher interest rates. Think tank Third Way estimates that higher rates in the event of a default may raise US government debt by a further $850 billion. It also sees a loss of 3 million jobs. Goldman Sachs estimates that if the US defaults, 1/10 of the US economic activity serviced by government payments will immediately halt. It's tough to estimate losses because such an event hasn't happened before. The debt ceiling brinkmanship played out in 2011 when Barack Obama was president, but 2 days before the ceiling was breached, Congress pushed back the limit. A similar story played out in 2013. So, is this a regular occurrence? Well, not quite. Until 1917, Congress sanctioned power to borrow to the government instrument by instrument and case by case. In 1917, in the thick of the First World War, the Congress consolidated all its permissions and gave the president one debt limit so that he could borrow and spend for the war. Since 1960, Congress has raised the ceiling 78 times, 49 times under Republican presidents and 29 times under Democratic presidents. Congress has even suspended the debt limit temporarily 7 times since 2013. Now, the ceiling is an American peculiarity. Countries like India have a rolling goal of fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP, which is a sensible moral restraint. The fiscal deficit limit holds today's government responsible for its current actions. A debt ceiling punishes the current government for sins of overspending and debt accumulation over the past many years. The key persons who have to agree to raising the debt ceiling or suspending it temporarily right now are President Biden himself, the House of Representatives Speaker, Republican Kevin McCarthy, and House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. The Senate is expected to vote along with President Biden, given that it is a Democratic majority. The ideal for Yellen, for Biden, and for the world would be if the debt ceiling is legislated out, since most countries don't have such a ceiling. But that's the least likely outcome, given that Republicans see it as a means to impose fiscal prudence. The worst case would be if a default actually happens, since it can push up yields on US Treasuries and throw Wall Street into utter chaos out of the fear of the unknown. But most experts bet politicians won't take it that far. After all, why would they want to shoot themselves in the leg?